Welcome to the Becoming Body Smart podcast, where we unlock the secrets of sustainable health and fitness and help you master your health habits. If you're tired of quick fixes, generic blueprints, and chasing short-term results, you're in the right place. It's time to become Body Smart.
All right, welcome in everybody on this Tuesday evening before Thanksgiving, so that it's a busy week. So thanks for joining us despite the busyness. So we're excited to talk about what are the benchmarks that you need to be hitting. What are the things you need to be doing every week to make sure that your fitness is improving? Because we've talked a lot of times about how your fitness needs to be improving even just to maintain, because maintenance with time, we're still dropping off because of age. And so we have to always be improving to be able to maintain. So what are some of the things we need to be regularly doing within each week to be able to make sure that our fitness continues to linearly progress? So we've got our list of the things that we feel like are most important. This was somewhat inspired by a conversation we listened to with Peter Attia talking to a fitness expert. And it was good stuff. We've kind of made our own tweaks to it of what we feel like is most important. But kind of helped inspire us to go in that direction, just to give credit where credit is due. Any opening thoughts, Mark, before I start off on the list?
Yeah. So in thinking about these different benchmarks, to tie it to some of our physiology and biology, I think is important. And so as we talk about these different things, we're looking at what does our body need to adapt, right? And so we're going to be looking at bone, muscle, tendon, our nervous system, and our cardiovascular system. Now, obviously, exercise affects every single one of our systems, right? It includes our endocrine system, right? Hormones and things like that, our digestive system. Exercise affects everything. But when we're considering these benchmarks, we'll talk a little bit more about how it affects each of these body areas and why it's important to kind of look at these as benchmarks, and how that really prepares us well moving forward.
Okay, perfect. So sorry, I'm typing this up. So these are important. So let's hit with that first one. We want to hit close to our max heart rate 1 to 2 times per week. Super important in making sure that we preserve that high-end fitness, right?
Are you typing those in, or do you want me to pop them?
No, I'm typing them up. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
So by doing that, by maintaining that high-end fitness, it allows us to be able to, keep growing our fitness. And like we said, you don't want your fitness to drop off over time. Maintenance is a lie, right? And so things drop off if we don't keep pushing. And that high end, what it really does, it preserves a lot of function and functional mobility. It preserves our ability to move quickly. It preserves our capacity to work hard, if that makes sense, so that we can push ourselves that hard. It makes sure that our VO2 max stays high, so that's just one of those good predictors of longevity is our VO2 max. There's just so many benefits. One of them being it improves your metabolism. It allows your metabolic rate to stay higher, because your body has to repair and recover from higher intensity work like that, as well as it gives it that signal that it needs to maintain that high intensity work. And so that allows you to keep burning more calories per hour with the other activities you're doing by maintaining a higher metabolic rate. So doing that, staying high intensity like that really is critical to our long-term health and fitness. Any other thoughts about that one?
Yeah, I think you can, remembering that our heart is a muscle. And so when we're doing things like that, right, having the high intensity, or we're getting our heart rate up high, in a way, it's like lifting weights for our heart. And there's ways our heart can get strong or can get bigger in an adaptive way, and ways it can get bigger in a non-adaptive way. And so typically that we see people that in later years have congestive heart failure, right? Their hearts have grown larger, but it's non-functional tissue, right? It doesn't help to pump the blood out any better. And so when we do some of those high intensity exercises, right, it's causing the heart to contract more forcefully. And so that it can deliver oxygen to our working muscles at a quicker rate. And so part of that high intensity, right, where we're getting close to that max heart rate, is actually improving the heart's ability to contract forcefully and quickly, and which is really good for our health, right? Then we don't have to, excuse me, I'm like dying here. I need my water. And so I think that's just another benefit to look at in terms of heart health, right? And as it's pushing the blood through the arteries, right? Making sure that they can continue to expand and contract well. My goodness, I cannot talk today. And so just from a physiological standpoint, it just helps with the robustness of your heart and of your veins and your arteries.
Yeah, all of those cardiovascular benefits, pushing it to that high end for a short period of time really does help drive those training adaptations. Really, really important. So, you know, we talk a lot about the 80-20 program. That 20% is so critical that we push ourselves, at least some of that 20%. It doesn't have to be all of that 20% that we are pushing ourselves like to redline, but we need to be doing that for at least some portion of that. I've heard some people say like 90-15-5 or 90-10-10, where you spend some of that time in zone 4 and then 5 to 10% in zone 5. It's tough to spend 10% in zone 5 for the average kind of just person training for their health and for wellness and things like that, versus if you're training for an actual event or purpose, you may find yourself closer to that 10% in zone 5. And so, yeah, it somewhat depends on what you're training on, but we want to also make sure we're getting the 80% in. So it's good that we're a couple of times a week, 1 to 2 times a week, hitting that high, close to your heart rate max. But we also want the volume of training that's so important. And so for that, we want at least, so the government recommendation is a minimum of 150 minutes a week of steady state activity, which is great. But we often, what's minimum versus what's the amount for thriving, right? Thoughts on that, Mark? Versus just maintaining?
Yeah. Well, I think this is just such an important point, is that a lot of the recommendations are just to get us good enough, right? So that we can stay alive. But again, we bring this up all the time on here. Our bodies adapted over millennia. Our bodies adapted over millennia to be used to moving all the time, right, throughout the day. And so having this at least low level, frequently dispersed with kind of high bursts of activities was our way of life for millennia. And so it's what our bodies are designed for, that kind of split of intensity. And so, again, what the recommendation say is if you get that 150 minutes all at once, great. But again, if we can split that up and be doing it more every day, and closer to that 300 minutes is that optimum level. And so if we can be doing something like that every day on most days of week, then it's going to really optimize our body systems, right? If we can be moving at that level almost daily, if not daily, that's really going to have a profound impact on our long-term health, on our long-term wellness, on our long-term ability to stay moving. And so, again, this is, hold on just a second, I'm going to just close my door real quick.
No, you're good.
Okay. Where was I? Oh, yeah. So with getting that steady state, again, it's just, we talked about this on the call last week, earlier this week, of not telling your body lies about what the future is going to be like, right? We want to tell it the truth of what the future is going to be like. And so if we give it a lot of regular continuous signals that the future is going to involve a lot of movement, then that's what it's going to adapt for, versus the future is going to look like, oh, well, I do exercise, a bunch of cardio exercise 1 day a week, and then the rest of it, I don't do much, right? Like that's the kind of future that the body's going to adapt for. And so while it's not bad, it's not optimized for what's going to keep us healthiest the longest. Again, in terms of what's happening with the body at this steady state exercise, a couple things, right? So our body is getting better at delivering oxygen. That means that it's growing new blood vessels and getting better at reaching the working muscles. We get more mitochondria, right? The powerhouses of the cell, so that we can process the energy in our body, right? So that we can keep going without burning out. If we spend all our time in that high intensity, that burns out pretty quickly, right? We can only go so long, versus in that steady state cardio, that's actually training our body to utilize energy well, right? Especially primarily fat as a fuel source, so we can keep going and going and going. And so again, that ends up being a really positive stimulus for our cardiovascular system.
Yeah, totally. And so I guess one of the main take homes there, and it's interesting how many of these same take homes will apply to strength training and other things, is that you have to have this balance of all of the areas, but also you have to like make sure you're getting the low intensity enough and the high intensity enough. But it's that total volume of training that really matters, that you're getting enough minutes in, that you're thriving, that you're able to create the adaptations in your body that allow you to thrive.
So this goes back to what you and I conversation from earlier today, of that you need both volume and intensity, right? Mm-hmm. It's not enough to just have one, because it's going to drive different adaptations. And so having both volume and intensity and being able to balance those two really gives us the best chance for a healthy future moving forward.
Yeah. It, like all things in life, being balanced is important, right?
Weird.
Yeah, kind of crazy how that goes. So there's kind of the cardio aspects of your weekly checklist is, so hit 1 to 2 times per week, and maybe a third time in the week, depending on what you're training for and how much volume of training you're getting. So, but 1 to 2 times a week of close to your max heart rate, steady state for a minimum of 150 minutes for maintaining, and 200 plus is you're going to see some improvements. 300 plus is where you're really going to thrive, where either if you're training for something or where you're going to see biggest adaptations and change. So there's kind of the summary for cardio. Now, strength training kind of fits the same idea, that you want to go higher intensity, heavier, at least 1 time a week. So we want to go to failure with each major muscle group with at least 1 lift 1 time a week, where we're taking that muscle, and again, big major muscle groups. So or big combination lifts. So like squats, bench press is another one, deadlift. I'm blanking right now. What are some other, like rows?
Squat.
Yeah, I said squat. But certain things like pull-ups, you want to have 1 or 2 lifts that hit major muscle groups. You're talking, big combined movements that you take all the way to failure. That you're doing at least once a week. That way you're kind of doing the same thing. You're getting that high intensity load, and you're making sure kind of where your boundaries are with your strength training of how much you really can lift, so that you're not under or overdoing it with kind of your moderate intensity lifts, right? When you're kind of just putting in the volume of lifting.
Well, and so, okay, I'm dying here. So, we talked about, again, this is one of our earlier calls about what we think we can do versus what we can actually do. And having that practice of going to failure once a week helps us to narrow that gap. Because a lot of times we'll be lifting and we're like, yeah, I only got a couple of reps left in me. But truly, we might be able to get out 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 more reps even sometimes more. And so it just going to failure once a week, it takes care of a lot of the training mistakes that we make.
Mm-hmm.
Also, as we age, so we have two main types of muscle fibers. We're just going to keep it broad, right? You might have heard of that. Type 1, and that's usually more our endurance type muscle fiber, and type 2, which is fast twitch, right? That's kind of the more power-based fibers. So as we age, we typically, the type 2, the fast, powerful ones, get smaller more quickly, right? We lose strength and size in those. And so unless we're going, like, as we get closer to failure, more and more of those type 2 muscle fibers get activated, right? And so as we're going to failure, we really are hitting those ones that tend to get smaller over time as we age. And so that ends up being really important. Going to, excuse me. And so we've talked before about how we lose muscle or we lose power at a faster rate than we lose strength, at a faster rate than we lose muscle size. And so if we're going to failure, right, it's going to help to improve strength, but also muscle size so that we don't lose power, right? We don't lose the ability to use our strength quickly, which again is a huge risk factor as we age, right? We were talking before about how the risk of falls goes up exponentially. And a primary reason is because we lose power, right? We lose the ability to recover when we trip or fall. And so again, going to failure is going to work on those. And then, so obviously a benefit for muscle, nervous system, right? Recruiting more of those type 2 muscle fibers is going to help. And then if we're lifting heavy, that just helps our muscles get better at coordinating with one another, especially in those big compound movements like a squat or a deadlift. Also, that higher intensity tends to be good for bones as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because anytime that we lift, anytime that we move something, our muscle is pulling on the bone to move our limb. And so that actually can really help with some of those bone level adaptations as well, getting that higher intensity, heavier load type of training.
Right. And we've talked before about how bone gets bored with most cardiovascular activities. So most repeated activities, bone gets bored fairly quickly. And one of the reasons why weightlifting is so great for bone health and development, not only do you get that, what they call like axial loading, um, not quite the same as impact, but it still causes a compression because you've got the attachment points at each end of the bone pulling and compressing that bone, causing it to reinforce itself. But because it's lower repetition, and then you take a break and then do another like set of loading that up, it allows it to kind of reset, and so the bone doesn't get quite as bored as it does with more steady state activities. Don't tend to be as good at building bone. The reason why like volleyball players or basketball players or tennis players have such high bone density relative to runners or other endurance athletes is they have a bout of cutting or running or jumping, and then they like do other things for a second, and then they jump and run again, and so it's intermittent enough that the bone doesn't get as bored because it's having to adapt all the time to those different loads. And so strength training is really good for that because it takes it right to the edge of the bone getting bored, and then you switch exercises to something else, and then you hit it again in a different way. We're on the next set. And so really it's so great for bone as well as muscle development. So just like with running or any cardio exercise, you need kind of that high end, and then you need the bulk of what you're doing. So we want moderate to heavy lifting 2 to 3 times a week. That is, kind of the volume of what you're doing with your lifts. So you want to lift heavy still, but it doesn't have to be all out, all the way to failure. If we're just looking at improving strength and increasing lean muscle mass, it doesn't always have to be all the way to failure. You're going to find that you're less sore and more functional in your daily routines. And by getting in a volume of just hitting those muscles, it maintains that strength. And so we have kind of the bulk of what we're doing and some high intensity stuff with the heavy lifting. And then we also want to add in some plyometric movements. And the plyometric, we talk about the brain coming up next. So we've got cardio strength and then our brain development with our muscle movements. And plyometric movements also are good for our brain. But that's something we want to hit it one time per week per major muscle group of those plyometric movements. But it doesn't necessarily have to be one workout that's all a plyo workout. So what I like to do is pick one exercise per day. I try to, lift weights several times throughout the week, 3 to 4, 5, whatever I can kind of get in. I hope to do it as many days of the week as I can. But I try to pick one or two exercises that I'm going to lift really heavy for and try to fatigue out. And then the rest I don't necessarily on that day. So I maybe pick one exercise that I'm going to go all the way to failure, and then another one that I'm going to do plyometric within that workout, sometimes 2 plyometric. And so that way, within the week, I'm hitting plyometrics with different muscle groups, but not one whole workout that's plyometric or one whole workout that is to failure, so that I'm not quite as sore, not quite as beat up, so that my activities and my cardio or things like that don't get quite as affected. And so saying, okay, I'm going to do plyometrics with this type of exercise on Monday, and then on Wednesday I'm going to do plyometrics with this type, and Thursday or Friday I'm going to do this, so that you're splitting where you're doing your plyometric stuff up. So one that's more calf heavy, like pogo hops, one that's a big jump like box jumps, things like that you're mixing that up from day to day, so they're not all the same. That's how I prefer to do it, so that I'm getting a little bit of each type. And there's a few different reasons. One is I'm not as sore and tired. 2, I'm working my brain in different ways, the mind-muscle connection. And 3, it allows me to balance that out so that I can still do the activities that I love to do. Any thoughts there, Mark?
Yeah, well, I think that's such a great point, because as with any of these kind of frameworks that we give, sometimes it can feel really overwhelming. Like, oh man, I got to do this and this and this. But it doesn't have to be like, you do this workout that's only for this thing, and this workout that's only for this thing, and this workout that's only for this thing.
Right.
And so,
it's
like,
not
let's
7
say
different workouts a week that you have to do.
not some, right? Like, we can combine a lot of this, and like Cameron said, plyo is it doesn't have to just be one specific workout. And honestly, probably better in doing something like that, because we're always trying to balance this fatigue recovery curve, right? And so not totally blasting ourselves out in any one thing. And it's actually what we want to do with plyo is make sure that we're not totally fatigued. So that it's actually probably good to do near the beginning of a workout for plyo. And some really positive adaptations specifically with plyo, like Cameron mentioned, the mind-muscle connection. Because we're moving in different ways, right? And especially like with the jumps, we're not coming out, it's not exactly the same movement each time as it is with a lift. Is that variation is good for our brain, right? That kind of having to react to the environment. Again, it's good for bones, right? We're loading our bones at a high rate. It's really good for our tendons, and we get better through plyometrics at storing and releasing energy, right? So as we do that when we're running, when we're doing different activities, we actually end up using less energy overall, because our tendons become good at storing and then releasing that energy. And so it reduces the energy cost of the activities that we do throughout the day as we include regular plyometric training. And then it's good for bone, good for muscle, good for the nervous system. But yeah, all these things Are you typing something, Cameron?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
I'm typing to Shannon. So Shannon said, I always do my plyo at the end, and then the hand over face emoji. So at the end, you just might not have as much gas in the tank, and the learning that you get from that may not be quite as great, because your nervous system's already fatigued, your brain is already fatigued, things like that.
Yeah, and that's nice. That's great. And it doesn't have to be, like Cameron said, it doesn't have to be a ton of plyo at any time. And the benefit of breaking it up again is that it's adding less fatigue into the system. Like if you do a little bit at a time at the beginning of your workout, it really shouldn't affect your ability to like you shouldn't add that much fatigue into the system, and so like you shouldn't be that much more tired at the end of the workout
Yeah.
if you break it up in that way.
Yeah, my plyo is interesting. I try to put a little bit at the beginning and a little bit at the end. One, just depending on what it is. Like just the reason for me being something that requires more coordination or something like that, I'll put at the beginning because it usually is a little bit less load. So like a pogo hop or a quadrant hop, I like that at the beginning more typically because I'm less fatigued and so learning happens better. Whereas like a box jump or something like that, I often that's less of a coordination thing for me maybe. I'm more fatigued, so I may not get as much power out of it, but I'm also a little bit more warmed up, so I feel like I'm not gonna injure myself quite as much by exploding on cold muscle. So that's where maybe doing a warm up if you're going to do something would be a good idea.
There actually is though, as a way to kind of test yourself how you're doing those things, it can actually be a great way to add it to the end. So it's similar to what we do when we do the BSPI, right? Like you're getting more and more fatigued through there. But what that helps us see is what happens when you're fatigued, what breaks down when you're fatigued.
Mm-hmm.
And so using that as kind of a self-test to see like, hey, where am I at? Where am I struggling with? Where do I tend to compensate can actually be really eye-opening and kind of how your body deals with fatigue. And so it can be a great thing to check. And with all these principles, it is kind of figuring out like, what does that look like for you with your schedule, and your lifestyle? Like, how do I fit these in a way that works and doesn't become overwhelming?
Right.
And so again, like a lot of these are taken care of. If we do a few runs a week, we do a few lifts a week. It doesn't have to take up this inordinate amount of time, and we can get a lot of bang for our buck, right? Like we don't need to spend hours and hours and hours lifting, like you see some people do. We don't need to spend hours and hours and hours running. Although the benefit for lots of that steady state cardio is probably going to outweigh the benefit of hours and hours and hours of being in the gym.
Right.
But again, it goes back to this balance of stimulus, right? What are we doing to drive those adaptations, and what can we recover from, right? So that kind of stimulus to fatigue ratio we want to look at, and it takes some finesse in figuring out exactly how to apply these. And sometimes we'll be like, you know what, like for whatever else is going on in my life right now, like dialing it up all the way, and each of these things maybe wasn't the greatest idea. Like, hey, maybe I can confidently get in 2 runs a week and 2 lifts or whatever that is. And it's all about starting where you're at and doing those little changes, but implementing them at a high level of confidence, right? I'm 8, 9, 10 out of 10 confident that I can keep up with this consistently, because as Cameron and I will say basically every call, consistency is key. And what matters is stringing together enough of the days that it drives the adaptations that we're looking for.
Right. So yeah, this is the ideal. I would say I don't always get that in, right?
Me either.
In.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's the ideal. That's what we're striving to try to do, right? Striving to try. It's what we are striving to do. And so like it's a good framework to just reflect back on and go, am I getting all of these things in? But yeah, take the pressure off of yourself and just say, am I being consistent first? That's the most important part. Am I being consistent and consistently getting these things in, and then kind of build from there, right? The more we get the consistency down, then we can build on more of the tactics that are going to help that consistency become more effective. But focus first on the consistency, and you'll see better, improvement than kind of being spot on with each workout, but doing it infrequently because it's so hard to organize and things like that, right? Don't get stuck in that all or nothing mentality. You have to do it exactly right. And then that last point for our brain, it's really important that we do coordinated movements with varied surfaces, varied terrains, varied movements. And so those come through in the activities that we love to do. And so for me, the whole point of all of this is to be able to do the activities that we love to do more frequently and better and safer. And so I would say do enough of this stuff so that you're ready and prepared and can do the activities you love safely and well. And that's the golden ticket. That's really where we see the biggest changes in our health and the biggest like fulfillment and rewarding like change happen from all of this. And what really keeps us motivated and on track is when we can see ourselves doing the things we love to do more often. And so not only does that help with our brain development and keeping us feeling young and motivated, it makes it way more enjoyable. If my fitness is focused around the activities that I love to do, so that when I'm doing it, it's me preparing for my hike this weekend or my volleyball game on, or tennis match or pickleball or whatever it is that you love to do. When your workouts are focused on that, it makes it so much more rewarding and enjoyable than when it's like, well, I ate a cheese blizzard last night, and so I'm going to have to work that off. That's not very motivating or fun. And so really the reward of all of it is the activities, and yet that we get so much out of doing those activities. There's so many benefits in terms of our overall health and wellness and mental health and things like that. And so, all of this is to support the activities, honestly.
Well, and that ends up being the benchmark, right? Can I do the things that I love to do?
Yeah.
And as we always say, moments matter more than metrics, right? And so can I stay active? Can I be active with the people that I love, doing the things that I love for as long as I want? And that's really, that's what it comes down to in the end.
Yep, exactly. That's the big key. All right. Okay. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. And we look forward to seeing you next week. So we're going to take Thursday off because of the holiday.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Yeah. And we will catch you on Monday, bright and early. See you then.
See you then.
Thanks for listening to the Becoming Body Smart podcast. If you have questions, thoughts, or want to continue the conversation, reach out to us on our socials or join our community. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It helps us bring you even more valuable content. Remember, sustainable health is a lifelong journey, and we're here to support you every step of the way. Live longer, live stronger, and become body smart.